What is the thing no one tells you about resilience?
So brace yourself. The thing that nobody tells us about resilience is that it is an incomplete tool for us to not just cope with the stress in our lives, but to actually build a really great life that we want to live. And I think, we've all been taught all you have to do, is you have to bounce back, and you just have to sort of like quietly endure and not whine and, just be a very stoic receiver of all of the chaotic things that are happening in our lives. And it's almost like resilience expects us to sort of be unbothered by all of it. There's been some breakdown in communication between the actual, academic scientific research on resilience and sort of what we've been promised in the popular media or just kind of in the world that we operate in. And what I learned was resilience is not designed to help us thrive. It's actually, if we think about the practices of resilience, like I'm going to write in my gratitude journal, I'm going to meditate, I'm going to engage in self-care, I'm going to get social support. Those things don't actually help us be happy through our craziness. They just keep us at a state of equilibrium. They help us not fall apart.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Things No One Tells You podcast. This is the time of year where I feel like there is obviously a lot that is blooming, that is springing, and part of that also feels like chaos, which is why I am so looking forward to sharing this conversation with you today. I talked to Tasha Eurich, and Tasha is the author, and she's also a scientist of the book Shatterproof. And the reason I wanted to talk to Tasha is because she is, by title, she is a self-awareness coach and communications expert, which I think is just really cool because who doesn't need a little self-awareness? But the things that she studies and has done for years have been very impactful, very fascinating. But Shatterproof is her book in an effort to help you learn how to navigate the chaos of life and really become your best self. So what she does by trade is she is basically a coach, as I said, and she works with world leaders. She works for with sports coaches, CEOs all over to really help them, people at the top, really create the culture that she has found through research is the best at maximizing getting the best out of people. In this book, however, she talks about so many different tent poles for how to really implement this in your own life. She also shared with me in this conversation her battle with the disease, the rare disease EDS, and how she discovered that she was dealing with that and also how that has changed her life. So, at the core, this is things no one tells you about resilience, because really that is what this book is built on. But I think at the end of the day, this conversation is really how to live your best life. Tasha, it is so awesome to have you here because I think you've written several books. You are a scientist, an expert. Shatterproof, though, I feel like this encapsulates everyone that I know right now, myself, my friends. This book, you give this blueprint for how to navigate the chaos. And welcome. It's so great to talk to you.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here. I can't wait to chat with you.
So you're a self-awareness coach, a communications expert, and I would love to just have you explain, how would you describe what you do on the daily?
So on the daily, I joke that I have 3 to 4 jobs, depending on who I talk to. My kind of bread and butter, you don't know anything about that, right? Like having way too
Right.
many people demanding things from you all the time. The thing that I've been doing for almost 25 years is I'm an organizational psychologist. And typically the way I spend that time is I help CEOs be better and create cultures that people want to work in and be, empathetic, kind, effective leaders. And I love doing that because the ripple effects are huge. If you can coach the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, everybody benefits when they get better. The second thing I do. Oh, yeah. Sorry. I'll stop
When
right
did
there.
you know? No. And I want you to keep going, but when did you realize that piece of it? Like, when did you realize too, that that's what you love to do and that you have a gift for?
This is kind of a funny story. I went to a really small liberal arts college on the East Coast. And as far as I knew, there was only one kind of psychology, which was, you want to go be a counselor or like talk to people
Mhm.
about their mothers. And I never really was super interested in that. I'm a fifth generation entrepreneur. So I've always
Okay.
wanted to do something businessy, but I fell in love with psychology. So I actually moved to New York City the summer of 2001, and I took this, introductory to organizational psychology class. And I remember it was being taught by this very bored TA who didn't want to be there. And like, it was very sad, the whole room. And I just remember on the first day of class, like the heavens parting. And I literally said, this is what I'm supposed to do with my life.
Oh
And I
my
didn't know
god, I love
exactly
that.
what it was going to look like. Yeah. But, and then I immediately applied to grad school and I went on and got my PhD in it. And I feel so, so grateful to be able to do what I do. Because again, it's like the intersection of, business and helping people create lives and livelihoods that bring them joy in their lives and bring them
Mhm.
prosperity. And it's just really incredible.
Do you remember what it was that what you guys were even talking about when you felt that, when you were like, "This is it"?
That's it. Nobody's ever asked me that. I think it was like the history of the field and how it actually was kind of invented in World War II when when they had all these draftees that they were trying to assign to all of these different jobs and really figure
Wow.
out what people were suited for. And I just thought, well, first of all, that's the coolest thing ever. And second of all, I was just so glad that there was this kind of psychology. Like I actually thought I had invented it before I knew it was there. I was like, what if somebody took business and psychology and put them together? Right? But
I,
thankfully, yeah.
no, that is so cool though, because the way that you describe that, I haven't heard a lot of people say that, and honestly, that's exactly it really speaks to me. That's how I felt when I wasn't sure exactly what it was I wanted to do. And we had one class that I had to take that was a practicum that was part of the communication school in my college at JMU. And I literally remember the first day when they were describing how we were all going to have to be the different roles of putting on a television show and being like, oh my God, this is not work. This is like heaven to me. Like
Yes.
it was a
Yes.
feeling, and I say this not to get deep, and I want to move on, but I think those are the breadcrumbs that are dropped intentionally for us, and it's
Hmm.
supposed to feel easy, And I think people lose that a lot too, and it's like we're so wound up with all the things, the chaos that you talk about so eloquently in your book, that we don't take the time, especially now, to think that feels good and it feels right. And maybe that's exactly how it's supposed to be. I don't know.
I love that. Well, and you're right. It's a sense of ease. I always
Yeah.
joke that I would do this for free, but luckily people pay me, like it's
Yes.
that kind of
Yes.
love of what we do. And lucky us.
I know exactly. Exactly. So wait, so carry on. So you have that experience and
Mhm.
then what?
And then I just said, I'm all in on this organizational psychology thing. And I went right to grad school. And because I'm such a workaholic, I was like, I can't just go to school. I have to also work full time. And
Yeah.
really, I actually, funny story, I coached my first CEO when I was 22 years old and
Wow.
fell in love with it and have been doing it ever since.
Who was the CEO?
She was it was a small craft brewery in the town that I went to grad school in, and it really grew and thrived. And they sort of brought me in to do their employee survey, and then it became something that was a kind of ongoing partnership. And I just thought, I don't know, there's something to me about. I love senior executives because they're these brilliant, successful people who nobody tells the truth to. And so if you can
Oh.
come in there, right, and later as I sort of developed my coaching process, I'll interview up to 40 people that work with this person. And it's not for the faint of heart, right? But it's like, how are you showing up? And what are your gifts and what are your limitations? And how can you really focus on something that's going to make you even better? And I just love that. But it's such a fun process and experience. And again, they're very brave for doing it.
Well, so world leaders are among the people that you have coached. I love the sports connection coaches in the NBA. I know you've worked with Eric Spoelstra. Can you describe? I think people in our audience would be interested in hearing that. Like when it comes to a sports coach, what is that like when you're working with someone to maximize their culture? Because I could talk sports culture all day.
I know. Well, and it's funny. I feel like totally unworthy to talk about sports with you, given my,
Oh God,
people
no.
joke and they say, like, "Do you like sports, Tasha?" And I'm like, "Well, I like the team I work with," and but I think that's a good example of where what I've found, and this is so cool about what I do, is that they could be in any business, right? And sports is a
Hmm.
business, just like a financial services company is a business. And what's constantly amazing to me is how even as I go around the world and I work with, people, I've worked on every continent but Antarctica, which is so fun.
Yeah,
Um,
that's amazing.
People are people, right? And leaders are leaders. And the sort of chaos, going back to your point, that they're dealing with every day is unique to them. But sometimes it's not, right? I think about other CEOs that I coach that aren't NBA coaches, and they also have to do, interviews with a bunch of reporters that are trying to, slip them up, or their shareholders are breathing down their necks in terms of the results they're getting. So I would actually answer that question by saying it isn't that much different. And that's what kind of makes it so cool.
What are some of the things that you would focus on when it comes to sports creating a culture that is successful, that is the best that it can be?
Yeah. I mean, I think the smartest coaches in the NBA, one of the things they do, in addition to obviously focusing on developing their team and their players, and Eric is a great example. I mean, the man created positionless basketball. So that's not
Mhm.
I didn't come in and say, like, let me help you with that. What I, right? It's like, come on now. But the area, for me is helping senior executives build great organizations, and it's about building a team that supports the team in the best possible way. Because if you think about it, not that this is the case in my experience, but if the coaches and the trainers and everybody that's there to show up for the players are not functioning successfully and optimally, that brings everything down. And so I think it's really interesting what MBA coaches do, and really all coaches, is they sort of have these two organizations that they're running, right? And the one that's there to serve the players, I think it's easy to overlook that. And that's why, again, I think the smartest coaches also focus on leading as well as they can there.
So it's like their team of players, but then the team that supports the players and the culture, which is just, yeah, that's really fascinating. I actually was having the conversation with Vernon Davis, who's a former NFL tight end, and he was talking about the most successful transition that his team had when he was in San Francisco. All of a sudden they had a new coach, and that coach, Jim Harbaugh, came in and created this like lunch pail culture. But the key there was he gave them accountability and ownership and really stressed the role of a man in a
Mm.
way that made them all want to buy in. Anyway, I think that's fascinating.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. When it comes to Shatterproof, what is the thing no one tells you about resilience?
So brace yourself. The thing that nobody tells us about resilience is that it is an incomplete tool for us to not just cope with the stress in our lives, but to actually build a really great life that we want to live. And I think, we've all been taught all you have to do is you have to bounce back, and you just have to sort of like quietly endure and not whine, and just be a very stoic receiver of all of the chaotic things that are happening in our lives. And it's almost like resilience expects us to sort of be unbothered by all of it. And
Hmm.
so I've been researching this topic now, resilience and what it takes to really thrive in a chaotic world for 6 or 7 years now. And one of the things that was most surprising to me was when I dug in and I read literally hundreds of scientific articles on resilience, and I studied it myself. I collected my own data, was that people's level of resilience didn't actually predict whether they could sort of get through their hardest times and come out the other end stronger, wiser, more fulfilled. And I thought, what's going on here? And so I sort of, as I dove in and tried to understand what was going on, it's almost like, remember when we were kids and we would play telephone, and we would
Yes.
start with one person and we'd have a message and the next person would say the message. There's been some breakdown in communication between the actual, academic scientific research on resilience and sort of what we've been promised in the popular media or just kind of in the world that we operate in. And what I learned was resilience is not designed to help us thrive. It's actually, if we think about the practices of resilience, like I'm going to write in my gratitude journal, I'm going to meditate, I'm going to engage in self-care, I'm going to get social support. Those things don't actually help us be happy through our craziness. They just keep us at a state of equilibrium. They help us not fall apart. And I remember just thinking, like, how could this have happened? How could we all, have been taught
Hmm.
that this is all we have to do? Because then what happens, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, is then we start to say, like, am I a failure in resilience? If everybody else seems like they're getting by and I'm doing all these things, I'm doing everything right that I've been taught to cope, but I'm still falling apart, there must be something wrong with me. And the science actually tells us that is not the case. That's not a failure of you. That's just us expecting something of resilience that it was never designed to do for us.
Wow. So, first of all, how do you collect your own data on resilience? What does that look like?
So I guess I have 5 jobs. We'll talk about the other ones the next time I come on. But yeah, one of them is doing very hardcore scientific research for fun. People always say, well, if you're not a professor, how do you do it? I say, well, I just spend my own money and I fund it. So for this, I hired, 12 research assistants, and we did a couple of things with this study. It's actually kind of interesting. So we reviewed over 1,300 scientific studies, so you don't have to try to figure out, like, what's really going on. We interviewed about 300 people about how do they approach getting through, we called it bad things, right? Like whatever the bad
Okay.
thing is, if it's work, if it's life, if it's family, really trying to understand what the most successful people do to get through the hard things in their lives. And then we collected a bunch of quantitative data. It's all the surveys that we're familiar with, like on a scale of 1 to 5. And we would collect people's resilience levels. And then we would try to see if it predicted things like, the last really hard thing I got through was made me better and stronger. And again, we were finding no relationship. People could have really, really high resilience and still say, this last thing I went through broke me. And again, that's not our fault. That's just expecting resilience to do something that it doesn't do.
So, what do you do with that?
Well, for me, I spent about a year going, oh no, right? I just sold this book. And I thought the book was
Yeah.
about how resilience is really great and it's going to help us. Um,
And wait,
eh,
was this in that process? Is that you sold the book, the concepts there? So you
right.
haven't crafted it, but you're writing it about resilience, and you thought the research was going to yield one thing, and you're saying it yielded something a little unexpected?
It did. Yeah. And, it takes a long time to sell books. So luckily, like by the
Yes,
time the
yes.
contract was being signed, I could be like, okay, this is what the book is really about.
Right,
But yeah,
right.
that part of that is what makes research so fun to me is, I did another large scale research project for my last book, Insight on Self-Awareness. And It's the surprises, right? If I found like exactly what I thought I was going to find, there's nothing interesting about that. But when I went back into those interviews I mentioned, and really, again, it literally took our team a year to figure out what these people were doing differently. And again, it wasn't resilience. So that was the big aha, was outlining this process that, became the soul of the book to
Yeah.
become shatterproof.
What is the most exciting part of that outline to you? I mean, I know this whole book is your baby, but what would you say is sort of the aha that
Mhm.
you think is maybe one of the most beneficial things that our viewers and listeners can take away?
So, what changed my life, and what I get these amazing emails from all over the world from readers about, is really, I think, the central idea of becoming shatterproof, which is when we are being, when the chaos of life is causing us to feel like we are unable to cope, let alone thrive, instead of sucking it up and moving on, or really just trying to get through it, trying to survive the day, there's another thing we can do that is really counterintuitive, I think, especially for women, which
Mhm.
is to ask ourselves, no matter what is happening in the situation, what can I do that's within my power to better meet my own needs? And that process is, in the research, they call it need crafting, right? Like like artisanally, we're crafting our needs.
Okay.
But what that looks like in reality is kind of going against everything we've been taught, which is it's very selfish to focus on your needs.
Right.
You're
I was just
supposed to
going to
be
say, you're
focusing
not
on
doing
everyone
something.
else's needs,
Yeah, you're not doing it for anyone
right?
else.
And, there are, and I go into this in the book, there are three, fundamental human needs that we are all, as human beings, put on this earth needing. And
Mhm.
it's actually not selfish to do that. It's strategic. It's what makes us, not just happy in our own experience, but able to be of service to other people.
I love that. Strategic, not selfish.
Exactly.
Um, so in that vein, and it's so funny because I'm thinking about this, it's like in a way, because of everything the way it is in society and how busy things are now and how things just keep evolving and getting
Right.
busier and you've got the phones and the whole thing, it's sort of like we have lost this measuring stick for what's appropriate with that. And I'm not even saying that, sorry, I'm not even saying there should be a measuring stick for focusing on our own needs, but you hit the nail on the head when you said that, especially for women, because I feel like you're right. My natural question, listening to what you just explained, was okay, so can you give a couple examples of that? Of like when realizing that you need to craft your own needs and attend to that and what that would be?
Absolutely. I can even just mind my own life in the last, 24 hours.
Yes.
Let me first go over what the three needs are, because I think that's kind
Yes.
of the foundation of this. And again, the idea is to say which of these three needs is most lacking, like today in my life. And again, not trying to do everything, really being practical and focused and saying, okay, this is the need I need to make sure I'm fulfilling for myself. So the first need, again, biologically programmed in all humans, is the need to feel confident. And what that's about is really not just feeling like we are capable of doing the things that we need to do in our lives, but we're also growing. We're improving our skills. We're honing what we're doing. The second need is choice. And this one is really about two things. One is feeling like we have a sense of autonomy. Like I can make
Hmm.
choices in my life for myself, but also I can live my life as the person that I am. So autonomy and authenticity are really the two things behind that. And then the third, which is what a lot of scientists argue is literally the fundamental human need, it's connection. And that's really having kind of at a couple levels. Like one is just feeling like we belong in our community, right? We go to the dry cleaner, we talk to the nice person that works there, we, have our people in our community. But then also having close, mutually supportive relationships. So that's kind of that's like the menu of what our needs, really need to be and what needs to be fulfilled. But I'll give you an example of just how simple this process is. Because I think people hear this and they're like, oh my gosh, I need to completely revamp my life because I've not been feeling very confident. What
Hmm.
we've found and I and other researchers have found is I call it micro need crafting. It's these tiny things we can do on a daily basis that have been scientifically shown to make our lives better. So here's the example.
Wow.
Last night, I
Listen
was
up,
writing,
people.
listen up, people. I know I literally feel like this is the secret to a happy life. And I've been able to experience that personally. And again, it's just really fun to see everybody applying this. So last night, up until the wee hours of the evening, I was working on a coaching report for a CEO that I'm going to fly to later this week. And, I've been writing these reports for years and years and years, but there was something about these results that I couldn't get my head around what were these, 3 or 4 limitations that I was going to, fly to him and say, guess
Hmm.
what? You're not perfect. And so what I ended up doing was I've been kind of on the side just for fun, learning the guitar.
Oh,
And
cool.
there was a song that I finally got like last week. And I remember playing it and just having this feeling of like, I'm sure if anyone listened to me, they would not agree, but like, I'm a rock star, right? I'm just nailing this. So I said, you know what I need to do? Instead of continuing to bang my head against the wall and not figure out these limitations, I'm actually going to take a 20-minute break and just go play that song over and over. And sure enough,
Wow.
I was like, yes. And then I went back and there something clicked in my brain. It wasn't immediate, right? I didn't instantly have the answer, but the whole emotional experience of that task changed because I had given myself that quick hit of confidence. And what we know from the research is when we do that, it transfers to other things. So it literally can
So,
be that simple.
and so that feeling for you wasn't about you getting your mind away from the thing that was frustrating you at the moment, that task, and switching to a different task. It was the fact that you were feeling confident when you were playing the
Yeah,
guitar.
that was how I chose it. So I didn't say, I mean, I knew I was going to have to do something different because working on that report
Yeah.
was draining my confidence. But the question I asked myself was really specific. It was, how can I get a quick hit of confidence? How can I feel like I am a capable human again? Because you know how it goes. Like for me, at least, I get in these loops of, you've been doing this for 25 years and yet you're totally incompetent. And just to get yourself
Mhm.
out of that and have a different emotional experience.
So, what are ways that you think people can give themselves quick hits of confidence? That's such a great, thought process to take yourself through.
So a tool I talk about in Shatterproof that I
Yes.
love helping my clients with, who are, by the way, all perfectionists, not that you and I know anything about that, um,
I know.
is
My poor
sure.
children.
I know I'm recovering. I always say I'm recovering. I call it the 10% buffer.
Hmm.
And basically what it
I love
is, so
this.
I'm thinking about a CEO that I coached, I talk about in the book, named Grace. And she was driving herself crazy with the 1% of people that were unhappy with her. She would stay up at night and worry. And you think about being a CEO, like there is no way you can make everyone happy. It's just impossible. So the tool I introduced to her, I call the 10% buffer. And it's basically giving yourself permission to be excellent and perfect 90% of the time. So for her, what changed was she stopped asking herself, is everyone happy with me? Losing game. And she started asking herself, do my employees feel heard even if they're not happy?
Okay.
So that's an example of changing the standard for ourselves in a way that's not going to, affect our success. In fact, she got more successful. She was more confident. But it helps us maybe stop being our own worst enemy when the difference between 90% and 100% only matters to us.
Wow. And have you heard from a lot of people that have found success and had these aha moments from your book?
It's been incredible. I'm actually, if I had the resources, I'd be able to be like, here are 25 examples, but I've been
Yeah, yeah.
collecting all of them. And what people are saying is it's almost like a different philosophy that they're living their lives by now. They went from, being, I call us stressed out strivers. Like we have things coming at us from every part of our
Yeah.
lives and all these demands and they never end, from like trying to make everyone happy and just getting through the day, to taking a step back, even if it's just, a 2-minute conversation we have with ourselves and saying, what do I actually need right now?
Hmm.
And again, like giving ourselves the permission. It's not, you know, I think it takes a little while, at least in my experience, to get rid of that guilt. But I think there's a certain sense of like, I know this is going to work for me because it is how I'm wired as a human. So I would, any of your watchers or listeners, if it feels kind of weird the first couple times or the first period of time, keep going, because there's going to be some aha moment. And that's what readers are writing me about, is just to say, like, I put this into practice and then all of a sudden this was happening. And,
Yeah.
again, we're not changing our lives. We're incrementally just sort of changing the micro decisions that we're making. But then if you add up the total impact of that, if you're asking yourself 5 times a day, what do I need right now? Like maybe I need to not go to that dinner party that I've been dreading because my feeling of choice has been, messed with in my workday. That's what it's about.
Well, and in that example, I mean, do you have a process that you suggest for those types of decisions? Because I feel like everyone can relate to that. There are so many things, and maybe it is a dinner party, maybe it's a gathering of sorts or something that you're just like, I feel spread thin, and my gut is saying, nah, let's not do this. But there's a world of reasons that you feel like you should. And I love how you talk about that too in your
Yeah.
book, just the should and the I think this is what I, need to be doing. How do you reconcile those things?
I'm not sure I have the 100% answer, but let me offer you a thought or two, and then maybe you can tell
Perfect.
me what you think.
Yes.
So I think, first of all, if we just blew with the wind of like, oh, I don't really feel like doing that, we would probably never do anything, right? So what we don't
Hmm.
want to do is overcorrect in a way that all of our friends are mad at us and nobody invites us to their dinner parties anymore.
Right. Because
Right.
that
So,
is a
so
reality. I
it
mean,
is the reality. And especially for me as an introvert, like if I gave myself permission to start doing that, everyone would, drop me and not be my friend anymore. But I do think it's kind of like, maybe it's a threshold. Maybe if I'm thinking about going to this dinner party and I'm kind of like, maybe if I went, I'd get a hit of connection, right? Like I'm feeling a
mm,
little tired, I'm feeling a little run down, but I'm not actively dreading it. But maybe if you think about the dinner party, and I don't know, it's maybe because like of the people that'll be there, or because you're exhausted and
yeah.
you're literally having a physical feeling of dread, I think that's a signal. And it just maybe as another comment before because I really want to hear what you think, because I know you juggle infinite numbers of things. We really have to think about boundaries and to
Yeah.
say, like, if I am dreading this and I think it is going to be bad for me, my friend's going to understand. Again, unless I've done that the last 5 times, my friend is going to understand.
I think, yes, I think that's a really good measuring stick to have. If there is a physical component to it, then yes, maybe you're listening. That is, I would say, because I was funny, I was going to ask you about where you were with boundaries, like what you think about boundaries, because I think that's really, it's a no shocker here for people that know me, but it's a hard thing to draw
It's
boundaries, and
so
I
hard.
I really suck at that, and I, sometimes I pay the price, but it's like also, as my mother would say, she deals with FOMO all the time. So it's like, on one hand, you're like, yes, my body feels better. The decision that I think that is best for me is not to do the thing. But then there's also that layer of stuff that's like,
Sure.
oh, but um, But no, I really like the idea that you keep coming back to about checking in with yourself and really taking the time to do that. I really like the thought that you just shared about maybe there's a hit of connection because I do think and like what I love about covering sports, but also broadening and talking to different people who are authors and leaders and everyday folks is like that really is such a through line is just the connection, and how that really is what it's all about and how we get energy from that too. So I think that's really really insightful. And I also think that, when you talk early on in the book about how we are programmed to focus on the negative and
Yep.
to pay much more attention to things. And this is sort of a different topic, but I was like, yeah, that's just, it's so true. And it's like, we as humans are drawn to positivity because that makes us feel good. And you share about compliments from one another makes us feel good and helps with connection. But for whatever reason, we pay attention to that negative. So I don't really have a point right now, but I think there's so much to all of this. And I really just think that these tools that you share are really awesome and eye-opening, and I think everyone should read it because it is really like the backed in science piece is awesome.
Well, and speaking of the backed in science piece, I agree with you. I think it's really important for us to understand sort of how we're wired as humans. And to your point, it's this weird paradox because we're drawn to positive things. It's like the metaphor that if you put a plant in a window, it'll kind of grow to the light.
Yes, and goes,
That's us at our best. But us at our worst, or us at in our survival mode, if you think about like our human ancestors, right, who were like literally facing life and death every day, we have something called a bad things bias. And it basically, like, despite the fact that we want to grow into the sunlight, our brains are designed to pay more attention to bad things. And if you think about it, let's say, our early ancestors, somebody left their habitat that day and went out hunting, and
yeah.
they found an area where there were a lot of predators. They had to pay attention to that. They had to encode that in their brains, because if they were focused so much on the positive that they forgot, they might forget to tell their family members not to go there. They might go there again themselves. And so I
Hmm.
think that's another thing is it feels sometimes like our brains and emotions are working against us. And it gives us a little bit of grace to just be like, okay. And you can talk to yourself. You can say brain, body, emotions. I understand that this is what you're designed to do. I understand that, the thing that's making me, you know, a week after I said that stupid thing in that meeting, not be able to stop thinking about it, is actually the
Yeah.
thing that kept us alive. It's the reason I'm here. It's the reason I'm here to obsess over that comment at work. And just to sort of like normalize that, I think that that's another way that we can give ourselves grace. And I think that's another thing that's really at the foundation of becoming shatterproof.
Oh, that's so good. That is so good. How has becoming shatterproof also played a role in your health journey? Because I know that that has been a huge thing.
So this is a long story that I'm going to condense very significantly. But I haven't in my, in over 3 books and, a couple decades of a career, I've never actually had the experience of living out the research problems that I was trying to solve. And for whatever reason, it kind of started in COVID. I've had a lifelong history of just mysterious medical ailments that doctors would say, "Oh, you're too young," or "There's no way you're actually having this experience." I'd come in
Wow.
as a
Yeah.
25-year-old and say, "I am in 10 out of 10 pain everywhere in my body every day," and they'd say, "That's impossible." Right? So it wasn't new to me to have these sort of like, just medical mysteries that I was trying to deal with. But I think it was because of COVID, like everybody just slowed down and I stopped running on adrenaline and I started getting sicker and sicker and sicker, where it was to the point where, after like 9 or 10 months, I was basically bedbound. And what was
In
interesting
pain,
to
or
me,
was it like
it was
what was the
everything.
pain like?
So it was 10 out of 10 pain. I couldn't point to anywhere. Like sometimes my neck would be really bad, but it was almost everything that could go wrong went wrong. So examples would be I would stand up too quickly and I would fall to the floor and faint. My heart rate, I would be sitting here just like I'm talking to you, and my heart rate would be 150 beats a minute. Or I would have fed the dog a half an hour ago and totally forget that I had fed the dog. I was exhausted. I was like, my body was just, it was like rioting against me, basically. And I had been through difficult health experiences. And I would argue that some of them were more difficult than what I was dealing with at that time. But what I experienced during that was more the emotional impact, where I literally woke up one day and was like, I've been resilient. I've been going to doctor after doctor. I've been trying to manage my symptoms. I've been doing, gentle exercise. I've been eating well. I've been, leaning on my friends and talking, but none of this is actually helping me. And I remember it so clearly. I had been to a doctor's appointment and I got home and I kind of got back in bed and I pulled the covers up over me. And I remember I was wearing my sushi pajamas, like very distinct detail. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. I'm done. And I had no idea what that feeling was until several months later when I discovered something called the resilience ceiling. And it's basically the moment that our coping ability runs out, because we've been taught that it's infinite, because, you know,
Hmm.
the harder
It's our
things you go
toughness. It's
through, the stronger you get, right? What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. That's actually not scientifically true. What doesn't kill us and what requires us to constantly cope and navigate every day with all these demands and all these challenges, it actually makes it harder to be resilient. So it was a very interesting experience to have lived that. The good news is, and this is what is so crazy, and I'm like, this changed my life in a way that I never even anticipated this writing this book would. But when I figured out the Shatterproof process, which is 4 steps that I talk about in the book, I followed it. I completely changed the way that I was navigating this illness. I went from being kind of like a passive victim to the CEO of my medical journey. I was able to
Mhm.
get a diagnosis. It's a rare genetic disease called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and it affects your body's ability to produce collagen and elastin, which are 2 proteins that are in every system of our body. But the
Okay.
average time to diagnosis of this disease is 20 years. And
Whoa.
I was able, and granted, I had had a lifetime of this nonsense, so I'm not sure when the clock actually started. But about 6 months after I started following this process, I didn't just have my diagnosis in hand. I had a team of doctors that were not gaslighting me, that were helping me, that were using, there's no treatment technically and no cure for EDS or Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, but there's a lot you can do to feel like 1% better. And it's just amazing when I look at my life and, like a year following that moment that I hit my resilience ceiling, I
Yeah.
was feeling better than I had felt in years. Not just better than I was when I, became bedbound, but better than I had in years. And I felt finally like myself again. And when I look back on that, I know that it was because I was working on not just my medical journey, but in that context, I was getting my own needs met. I was working on my confidence. I was finding choice. I was getting way better at connection, because it can be really alienating when you're
Mhm.
facing something like that. And so, yeah, it's kind of crazy. Like it's almost like you can't make that stuff up. But as it was happening, I just remember thinking, I have to figure out what people are doing differently than resilience, because in some ways my life felt like it depended on it.
And did pivoting become part of that, would
It
you
did.
say?
So one of the things that I talk about in the book is, and this goes back to what we were saying, we don't have to completely remake our lives to better meet our own needs and to solve the problems that we're facing. So actually, the first thing I did was I decided there was going to be one thing that I was going to do differently as, sort of baby Shatterproof Tasha. And that was that I was going to spend, this is pre-ChatGPT, 30 minutes a day researching rare illnesses. Because a
Wow.
strength that I have that I could build my confidence on is I love reading nerdy scientific journal articles. And I thought, well, I'm not a doctor and I can look up the terms, but I know how to read a journal article. So I started doing that. No more, no less. Every day it was 30 minutes. Sometimes it was more. But as I was doing that, I started, before I even had like, oh, this is the disease I have in my hand, I started to feel differently because I was taking control. I was
Mm.
increasing my sense of confidence. And at the same time, I was, doing other things to build connection. But that was actually what led me to be able to go to specialists and say, hi, I know you have been taught in medical school that you'll never see one of me in your entire career, but I'm pretty sure I have EDS. How can we get this solved, right? And it took me a couple of doctors to get somebody who would diagnose it. But literally, it was that
Wow.
30 minutes a day that set everything in motion.
And so you basically discovered what you thought it was,
Mhm.
and you were correct.
And my friend Bob Glazer, who's an author, writes great books. I was on his podcast a couple months ago, and he goes, do you ever wonder how much easier that would have been if you had ChatGPT?
Tasha, right? Right?
I'm like, Bob, let's
That's
not talk about that. Let's move on.
but that's
Wouldn't
okay.
have
You know
taken me
why?
months. Yeah.
Because you lived through it and you went through it yourself, and therefore it, like, you have now, it that plays such a role, I think, in what you are able to give to others too.
That's so well said. I
Tasha,
love that.
it's true. But Tasha, it is so great to chat with you. And I know, I could keep you here all day, but before we say goodbye, is there something that you're most hoping people take away from this conversation or from reading your book Shatterproof? What would you say is the most important thing to you?
So I'd come back to it's the two-part takeaway. Number one, if resilience isn't working for you, it is not your failure. It is that resilience was not designed for the lives that we live. And then number two, instead of being resilient, if you start to craft your own needs, it's not selfish, it's strategic.
Strategic, not selfish. It's a great t-shirt. I
Ooh, it
also
is.
want to compliment you on the bookshelf behind you because that rainbow is speaking to me. I love it.
It was my COVID project. Thank you. It makes
It's
me very
amazing.
happy.
No, listen, it's so great to talk to you. I just love hearing all of your thoughts, and I would love to talk more. We would love to have you back. But thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Lindsay. It was such a pleasure.
I really hope that you guys, whether you were watching or listening, will go to our show notes and see where you can find more from Tasha. I loved everything she had to share about how her findings are backed by science. And I really think that the things that she has discovered along the way are things and tools that we can take and apply to our lives. I also really loved her story about how she came to be in this profession in the first place. And I do think that we need to keep that in mind, that when something out there seems exciting, when it seems like it might light us up, but more than anything, when it seems like it feels easy, those are the things that we should be paying attention to. So thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Things No One Tells You. Again, the book is Shatterproof by Tasha Eurich. We hope that you'll share this episode with a friend that you think needs it or could benefit from it. Also, rate, review, and as always, we appreciate you being a part of this community, and we can't wait to see you here next week. Thanks so much for joining me. I can't wait to see you back here next week. Please don't forget, follow and subscribe to Things No One Tells You. And of course, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, don't forget to leave a 5-star review because that's really what helps people get more listeners. We would love to grow this community. We are so grateful that you're a part of it. See you next time.